I'm Carrie Mercer of Eva Seraphine Studios. I'm a former military broadcaster and survivor of domestic violence and sexual assault. I created Honest Conversations as a way for incredible men and women to tell their stories in their voice. It may be raw, unscripted, and off the cuff, but it's candid, open, and honest, the way things should be. Pay for it, so we're gonna record and then I will go in and re-record again. So since this is apparently an issue. So hello.
Hi.
I'm Carrie. Nice to finally meet you.
You too.
Thank you for your grace and me having to reschedule a couple times with personal and work issues.
No
I
worries.
really appreciate it. I'm super excited that I was able to have you as my first guest.
I'm happy to be here.
So, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm Phil Goldstein. I'm a writer, I guess, first and foremost. I have written a book of poetry. I write professionally for work and have for a long time as a journalist and then a content marketer. And now I'm a copywriter in marketing. Um, I am 35. I'm married. I live in Washington, D.C. with my wife and our animals. We have one dog and two cats. Dog named Brenna, and cats are Grady and Princess.
Oh,
They're wonderful. They're my family, and um, yeah, I guess, part of all that is that I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and my book of poetry is all about that, and reckoning with that. And I've written and spoke pretty extensively now about it, and just happy to be here to talk with you.
that's wonderful. Yeah, I mean that was one of my big questions. That is that your driving force behind your poetry is your, being a survivor of sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse. Is that what got you into writing poetry as a way of, um, you know, like a therapeutic?
It's actually somewhat of the reverse. So,
Okay.
I started writing poetry actually, honestly, during the time in my life when I was being abused, kind of late elementary, early middle school, and wrote poetry pretty extensively, into high school. It was your typical kind of bad high school poetry. Did some slam poetry, spoken word stuff in
Mm.
college, which I really enjoyed. And then it really just kind of dropped off after I graduated from college and started working. And then, shortly after, I wound up starting individual therapy to kind of focus very intensively on the trauma around the abuse. My therapist, was talking with me and recognized that I was a writer, and she really encouraged me to write to, help me deal and process with a lot of these really complicated emotions. And so I started doing that, and then my then girlfriend, now wife, Jenny, really encouraged me to keep going and think about potentially it as a book, which, I had not, even contemplated at the time that I was starting. And it just kind of grew from there.
Um, I have to ask too because it's very rare that that you do, especially back when we were growing up, but the male voice, especially in with survivors, it seems to be a minority voice. Um, do you feel like that has given you and your poetry the opportunity to be a little more in the forefront? Um,
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not, the only one. There are plenty of, men who have written books, whether that's, memoir. I know this guy, Stephen Mills, came out with a book that's gotten a lot of attention called, I believe it's Chosen Ones. Let me just make sure that I'm getting that correctly. Oh, it's Chosen, excuse me, Chosen, a memoir of stolen boyhood by Stephen Mills. Then, there are lots of other poets who've written about trauma. Paul Tran's All the Flowers Kneeling, which came out last year, is a wonderful book. But, I do agree with you that men and male voices still very much are a minority in the conversation around survivorhood and trauma and sexual violence and sexual abuse. I think that that's starting to change, not in the sense that men are becoming, the majority or even, at parity with the number of women who are speaking about this. But I do think that more men are starting to come forward. I think that the culture in the last, 4 to 5 years has started to shift to allow men to feel more comfortable coming forward and talking about things. In this area, I think about the Leaving Neverland documentary about Wade Robson and James Safechuck and the Michael Jackson abuse.
Mhm.
And that was honestly a really powerful, cultural artifact for me in spurring me to talk publicly about the abuse. At that point in time when that documentary came out, which was back in 2018, I want to say,
Pre-COVID,
around.
yeah, I think so.
I can double check on that. I had spoken to, friends, and I had spoken to some family members. It's actually 2019, but yeah, January of 2019, and but I had not spoken publicly about it. And that April is when I decided to. And I think a big part of that was just me coming to the realization that this is not something that I should feel ashamed talking about because I did not do anything wrong. I was
Right.
the one who was harmed and abused by my older brother from the time that I was 10 to 12 and a half. And, me letting go of that shame and talking about things publicly, I think was really important for me, just because it's like, well, why is this something that I should feel compelled to continue, putting under the rug, especially after I've told people, close to me in my life. I've told my closest friends, I told my parents, I told my girlfriend, and so it just was this dam that broke. And I've been kind of speaking about things publicly ever since, both in talking about my book, but just about the subject in general.
Um, how hard was it for you to be able to start talking about it publicly, though? Because that is such, you were talking about having to get past the, it wasn't my fault. I didn't do it, but there is some kind of, with some people, the shame, the stigma, when it happens. How hard was that for you to now bring it out to the public, especially as a man, and say this happened to me? I mean, is it different?
Well, honestly, the thing that I agonized the most over before I decided to talk about it publicly, and I wound up, writing this really long post on Facebook about it, which is how I kind of um, came out, about it. the thing that I agonized over most was what my parents' reaction was going to be,
Mhm.
and it was not good. They were very upset, and you know, uh, but I decided that it was time, and that I wasn't going to let anybody's reaction, or fear of their reaction prevent me from talking about it. I received a lot of support. There were a lot of people who were very shocked and upset, and just had no idea,
Mhm.
because it was something that I had kept silent about for almost 20 years. But honestly, I received a tremendous amount of support, after I started talking about it publicly. And what was really upsetting to me at the time was that I was receiving more support from kind of acquaintances or even strangers than I was from my own parents, which is not really uncommon, especially if it's interfamilial abuse that you're coming forward about. And so the fact that I'm a man, I don't think um, really kind of factored into my decision about whether to um, talk about the abuse publicly. But I do think that it's important, just in the sense that there are still many men out there who have been assaulted or abused, who don't feel comfortable talking about things publicly, or even telling people who they're really close to privately about it, just because that social stigma, I think, even though it's getting um, less and less and is easing, I think still persists,
Still there.
just in the sense of, like, you're not, a real man if you admit to something like this, or you're weak, or you're gay, even though you're heterosexual,
Mhm.
especially if it was a man who assaulted or abused you. um, and I think, like I was saying, that I think that those misperception or those cultural myths are starting to shift. And I think that, as I've said many times, the more men who come forward and talk about this kind of stuff, the less power that stigma holds. But I definitely think it's still there. And this is not at all to take away or diminish from, the incredible difficulty, that women face in coming forward to talk about abuse, or the
Mhm.
incredible pain and trauma that anybody who's been assaulted or abused experiences. Um,
But
you know,
this is just as important, you know?
well, yeah, I mean, I just think that it's important to recognize the fact that our society and our culture has this um, ethos, or this myth around what men should
Mhm.
be, and how they should act, and how they should talk about things in the world, and don't
Right,
cry, and don't show emotions, and be the strong silent type, and
right.
all that bullshit. I don't know if I can curse on this, but
No, you can, yes, no, that I have a mouth of a sailor, so it's quite okay.
all that
No.
bullshit that you get acculturated to, in society. And I think that is something that cuts across religions and geography,
Mhm.
and social structures, that men are just expected to not you know talk about these things, and not sort of bear their emotions, and not reckon with trauma if they've experienced trauma, which is obviously deeply unhealthy, and leads to a lot more suffering and self-blame, and really I think opens the door for a lot of self-destructive behavior that I feel very fortunate to, for the most part, have kind of sidestepped.
Okay, it's working now.
Okay.
All right, so you were talking about being able to kind of skirt the destructive behaviors that kind of goes along with, especially childhood trauma. But I wanted to get into, a little bit about the inability to talk about your trauma, especially when you're a man, and how it can cause um, those destructive behaviors, or even self-doubt or anything like that. And the reason why I bring that up is because I too am a trauma survivor, and I have lived in a world of you know women who, and I feel like you know it can be very segregated, especially because in a lot of cases women have been assaulted by men, and so they don't quite understand that men can get hurt too. So do you feel like, or have you talked to people that feel like maybe that impacts how or why a man is able to talk about it, um because we are so vocal about our trauma and the fact that we have been hurt by men, that it does kind of diminish um how men get hurt. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think that to some extent that's true. Again, I think that it's less around sort of how women talk about being assaulted or abused by men and how that affects men, and more in my mind just about kind of the cultural sort of
Mm.
taboo, or kind of
How a man
markers.
should be.
Yeah, just the concept that we have about what masculinity means and is supposed to convey. um you know I anybody who knew me growing up would tell you that I was not sort of a manly man. I didn't do sports. I was never big. I was never muscular. I was this kind of uh, thin, nerdy guy who was into poetry and did, musicals in high school. And
Me
so,
too.
yeah, I mean, I was a musical nerd, in addition
Hmm.
to being a nerd of all other stripes. And so,
Hence my
yeah, yeah. And so but at the same time, I think that I very much kind of imbibed and just absorbed through osmosis, the sort of ideas about what it means to be a man, and sort of the shame that would come from talking about something like being sexually abused by your older brother when you're in elementary and middle school. And so, you know, I think that in addition to sort of a lot of very specific, factors related to my family dynamic, and how I related to my parents and my brother, and just what my role was in the family that inhibited me from speaking. I think that those sort of larger cultural forces are a big part of what kept me silent for so long. So, I don't think that women speaking about trauma and assault and survivorhood diminishes um, men's suffering. I think that just there needs to be a continued broadening of cultural awareness that, this does affect men as well, and that they may need more um, space or support to help them to feel comfortable around coming forward to talking about it. I was lucky enough back in 2019, I think the fall of 2019, to take part in a group therapy experience with five other men who were also survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And, that was a really wonderful, intense, experience. And it was really great to be, in a safe, controlled space with other men to talk through these issues. And, one of the things that we did talk about is just this stigma and taboo, that still persists. And just, how to varying degrees that had kept a lot of us, silent. I mean, I was 32 when, I was taking part in that, but there was, somebody who was in his 50s, who had only recently started, talking about it. And, you know, uh, I think that this is still the most accurate research, which, I've been quoting for a long time, that the average age of disclosure of childhood sexual abuse is 52 years old, average.
Wow.
So, because many people never tell, or they tell, very, very late in life. And so, I think that, again, starting to change. I think that, we just need to be aware and continue to raise awareness in the culture, and in society that, this affects men as well.
You were talking about the family dynamic.
Hmm.
How has that changed? I know you said your parents weren't happy when you disclosed. How has that changed for you since then? Have they become more supportive after dealing with the news, or?
Well, no, and then yes. So, you know, we, well, I haven't spoken with my dad since 2019. And I hadn't really spoken with my mom for quite a while. Um, in part because every time that I would try to talk with her about it, she would wind up saying something that was really hurtful and that diminished and minimized what had happened. And, made me feel like I was to blame for not telling them about the abuse when I was a kid,
Mhm.
which just, in the vast majority of cases does not happen, for a variety of reasons, fear, shame, not understanding what had happened to you, uh, not really even because of, disassociation, being fully aware of what had happened to you.
Mhm.
I'm really happy to say that, recently my mom and I have started talking a little bit, mainly because, around this past Thanksgiving, I got an email from her, that, um, really, really, I think went a long way to addressing a lot of the reasons why I was so upset with her, that, she apologized for telling me that I should have told them about it when I was a kid. She apologized for not being more supportive of me after I had told her. She explained that she was in shock, and that she had been feeling a really complex stew of emotions, but that she wanted to have a relationship with me, and I want to have a relationship with her. And so I'm really glad that we've been talking. I think we're actually going to talk later today, and it's we'll see where things go. But I think that it's it's always great, if you can have the support of your family in the immediate aftermath of you disclosing a trauma, especially a trauma like childhood sexual abuse, especially
Mhm.
childhood sexual abuse that has taken place within
Within
your
the family.
family.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, that's not always the case or not often the case. But I think that the important thing is that you know people can change and do change, and um, you know we'll see what happens.
Are I know you said that the poetry kind of already was kind of something you already did, but your book, did this specific book come about um, because of the experiences um, behind you disclosing to your family and the results of that? Did that really come about because of that?
I had started writing the first poems that would become part of the book before I'd ever told my parents, just as a way to kind of process things. But then, a lot of my experience that, um, I had after I told my parents, wound up, making its way into the book. Um, things like the fact that I was the best man at my brother's wedding and gave, a best man speech extolling what a great person he was at the time when I had just started going to therapy, you know,
Mm.
about the abuse. Like, it was literally weeks after I had started.
Mm.
That experience became a poem that made its way into the book. And so, yeah, I mean, is the book, which I should say is called How to Bury a Boy at Sea, and which you can get anywhere books are sold, and which I would encourage everybody listening to do if you can.
Mhm.
Um, the book delves, very much into the past and my childhood and what happened, but also, goes up until, the point in my life where I got married. And so, I think that um, it's a book that reckons with a lot of different things. Obviously the trauma and the hurt and the pain, and the isolation of the abuse, and feelings of anger, and sorrow, but also, um, ultimately, of finding connection and healing, and love. And, um, I think one of my editors, said this to me as we were kind of wrapping up the process of the book, and I appreciated it, and I hope that anybody who reads the book feels that this is true. In that, the sense of healing, and I wouldn't say, total peace, because healing is ongoing and will
Right.
be forever, and is a nonlinear thing. But the sense of healing and being able, I think, to ultimately forgive your past self or your younger self, um, for the trauma and for how you responded to it. They were saying to me, that that is hard won, and it's not kind of cheap or maudlin. And I hope that that's true. I mean, it's certainly true in my life. It you know it hasn't been a easy journey, and I don't want to give the impression that it's been an easy journey to get to where I am right now. There were a lot of really, really shitty years. You know, 2018 was a shitty year. 2019 was an even shittier year than 2018. Things started to get a little better in 2020. I got married in 2021, and my relationship with my wife, went through a lot of ups and downs. And she's a incredibly wonderful and patient person, who I'm really lucky to have as my partner. But there were a lot of ups and downs, and things went down before they went up. Um, but I'm really glad that I'm in the place that I am.
Yeah, I really, I really love to hear the way you talk about yourself because you seem to be a very self-aware, and that's very self-aware of who you are, where you're at, you know, um, and I really love that, and that kind of leads to my next question because the title, "How to Bury a Boy at Sea," um, is that your way of when you picked that title? Was that your way of putting the past behind you,
Yeah, I mean,
or
I like to think that the title can kind of serve two purposes. One is in the sense of, you know, abuse, and especially childhood sexual abuse. And The poet Ruth Awad, who is wonderful and who wrote one of the blurbs for my book, um, said this in her blurb where, she was talking about how water is this really powerful metaphor in the book. You have throughout the book these two characters who are on this boat, alone, and she was talking about how you know a drift, a trauma like childhood sexual abuse can set a boy. And so, on one level, I think that the title serves to just illustrate that, how can a boy wind up buried at sea? It's from something like childhood sexual abuse. But it also, has that other meaning of being able to lay to rest
mm,
the past and the boy who was inside.
mm-hmm.
And so, I like to think that it can work on both of those levels.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, everybody can kind of interpret things, I guess, in their own way.
Yeah,
So, would you be willing to read one of your poems?
sure. I actually, um, I posted this poem, that I'll read, um, online, a couple of days ago, just because A, it's one of my favorite poems from the book and that I've ever written, and B, I just think, um, does a lot to kind of encapsulate the essence of the book. So I'll read this poem, called Gibraltar. I see you now in the hazy veil of painted twilight, a shadow, but not a terror. You were the monster of my childhood whose hand-me-downs once kept me warm. Sometimes the flash and force of memory shoots me straight back, deeper than I want to go. The way I lie down in a bed is enough to take me to the times when you led me to lie with you. I ache the way a tree must ache when it is chopped and left to stand, gashed open in a summer thunderstorm. I stand now in a field with the sun bleeding away to violet. I stand knowing what I have endured, what I can endure. I am a promontory, gauzy in sunshine, the sea lapping green below. You are a shadow passing over my face, a cloud, a memory.
That line about the hand-me-downs. I mean, that was a powerful poem, but that line especially. I have two family members who experienced something very similar with their siblings. So that resonates. It's very powerful.
Thank you.
I actually had seen one of the poems that you had posted a little while ago, but I don't know that I saw that one. So it was a really good one. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Um, yeah, I like I said, I'm a little bit more scattered than I wanted to be on this one because I had some personal issues going on myself. So I had like this
All
whole
good.
plan for you and all these questions and stuff like that. So, and then of course with our little Zoom thing this morning. And the title of this is Honest Conversations. And I always try to be honest with my own dysfunction. So, um, if excuse me if I'm a little scattered.
Well,
Um, but I wanted to ask you a couple more questions and then we'll be done. But y- how do you feel? And this is actually maybe personal to me because I have been like I do personal videos about what I deal with on a daily basis, and I put a lot of my own trauma and stuff out there. But um, how do you personally handle feeling so naked in public, putting your trauma out there? Like, does it like sometimes I'll put stuff out there and I'll be like, you know, is there do you have the confidence to do that and know that you know it's okay, you feel good doing it, because sometimes I don't. So I'm just curious as to how you feel when you put stuff out there so personal and so intensely beautiful.
well, thank you again. I mean, I think that early on I was much more hesitant um, about talking about things publicly, obviously. But I think that as time has gone on, I've gotten more comfortable with it, and I think that um, you know, I think that I've gotten more at ease with um, a role kind of as somebody who can hopefully help other people by speaking out, especially other men. And um, you know, it's something that it's not that I like feel it as a duty. It's
Mhm.
just something that I hope, you know, I can help contribute to. You know, I I don't know how long or how often I'm going to be, continuing to speak out about things, with the frequency that I've done over the last, couple of years, especially, as the book has come out. But it's something that I will always, I think, want to help out with as much as I can, just because I think it's important to recognize that, childhood sexual abuse, sexual violence, it's so much more prevalent in our society than we even know, just
Mhm.
because there are so many people who have experienced it who are silent about it because of the shame and the stigma, whether you're a man or a woman or older or younger. Um, And, so any stats that you see about, the prevalence of sexual assault or sexual violence or childhood sexual abuse are almost certainly an undercount of
Not
how
accurate.
prevalent it really is.
Yeah, because they say 1 in 5 people or something like that, but it's actually more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I could stand in a room of 10 people, and I'm pretty sure it's almost like 8 or 9 that have the same or similar stories.
Yeah, I mean, and, obviously, it's something that's really hard to talk about, no matter who you are or where you are in your life.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I'm 44 years old, and it's taken me like, I mean, I've always been a little more open about stuff, but I've always been one that talks a lot. So, um, but I'm more open about it now than I was, even 26 years ago or whatever. I mean, when I disclosed, I got railroaded out of the military for disclosing it
Mm.
because, you know, that's it's who it was. So, there was the shame behind that. If I'd kept my mouth shut, I could keep my career kind of thing. So, but I'm much more open about it now. So I think the culture's changed enough too that people feel a little bit more comfortable. And I'm working on a documentary, and I noticed that the younger generation were much more self-aware, much more open about their story than people that were like my age. They were still having a hard time opening up about it.
Well, I'm really sorry that that happened to you, obviously, and I know that things are starting to change, kind of, especially in the military, culture and the laws around, reporting and accountability and things like that, which I think is good, obviously. But to your second point, I do think that younger people are more open about, you know, talking about trauma and just difficult things in general, for a couple of reasons. I think that, um, there's much more, um, use of and less stigma around therapy, and just going to therapy, which recommend for almost anybody.
Mhm.
Can't hurt, can only help. Um, and so I think that people who are my age and younger are, very big into, you know, going to therapy. I
Mhm.
think that it's super helpful, super important to be able to talk to somebody. And so I think that that process gets you both more self-aware, um, about what's going on, inside of you, but also I think just gets you, in a place where you feel it's easier and you feel more comfortable talking about things, just because, if you've talked about it with your therapist and maybe you're talking about it with your friends, it kind of opens the gateway there. And I just think that I think that in my parents' generation and older, there was just this sort of societal expectation or way of thinking that, like, whether it was abuse or alcoholism or addiction or infidelity or whatever, you don't talk about it. You know,
Mm-mm.
you don't air your business, you don't air your dirty laundry, you keep it all inside, and you find some way to deal with it. You know,
Yep.
and I think that that's obviously extremely unhealthy and unhelpful. Um, but that's the way that it was, and I'm glad that it's changing.
Yeah, I made that, or I talked about that a while ago because that was something that I had brought up in one of my videos about the fact that, our parents' generation didn't talk about it. Their parents' generation definitely didn't talk about it. And so, I think especially as parents, with my kids, I'm always talking about everything. So now they're talking about absolutely everything. But the one thing too is, I have family members of that generation when they would try to disclose, it would either be don't talk about it or what did you do? Those were the two big things. So, but I'm glad that um, we are in a time where people are feeling more comfortable to talk about it because that those generations are actually able to start talking about it too.
Yeah.
So, which is helpful. Not that this is a conversation that any one of us want to have, but we're having it. So, um, but last question. Um, we were talking about support um, earlier. Um, how do you feel with the support system that's in place? Like, how do we put this good? Do you feel that the support that you're getting is allowing you to push forward and continue? Because I know you said you weren't sure how much longer you were going to go at this pace, but is it keeping you comfortable enough to know that you can continue doing what you're doing, with writing books, and still telling your story, like you got to a place where you felt comfortable enough to keep doing that?
Oh yeah, for sure.
That's good.
I'm really very grateful for the support structure that I have in my life, whether that's
Good.
my wife Jenny, or my therapist, or my friends, my family, people in the poetry community,
That's good.
people in the community of survivors, and so yeah, I mean, I think that it's important to, have these kinds of conversations that we're having. It's important to continue to reduce the stigma. Uh,
Hmm.
it's important to keep writing and speaking about it. And so, again, I think that I've gone through this, pretty intense period of doing that, especially to help get word out about the book, which again is called How to Bury a Boy at Sea. Um, but I think that it's important for anybody who has gone through a trauma to have a strong support network as
Hmm.
they're trying to reckon with it and come to terms with it and heal from it. And so again, therapy, extremely helpful. Find yourself, a therapist who you feel comfortable with and want to work with. Friends, family, and I think that it's also really important. Obviously, I wrote a whole book of poems about this. I'm starting to write new poems that are not in this vein, which I'm really excited about, and will hopefully become a new project. Um, but I think that it's also really important to just do things that are, going to make you happy and
Hmm.
get you out into the world. This evening I'm going out for drinks with some former coworkers. We're all sort of at this point former employees of the place where we used to work, but we're getting together and I'm really excited about that. And so, this is obviously a really heavy stuff. And so I think that it's important to remember and celebrate and take part in the
Balance
joy
it out. Yeah.
that, is out there in life, in your friendships, in your close relationships, with your partners and your loved ones. And so, yeah, I think that balance is really key.
Yeah, and sometimes it is hard to find that balance. Um, I mean, where you're at in your healing journey, but eventually, that balance can come and you can find it. Um, I had a hard time. Sometimes I still do have a hard time finding that balance, but um, I'm a more of a recluse anyway. I've been self-employed or not working since for a long time. So, but yes, it is. I have 5 kids, so, and a husband, a very wonderful husband. So, actually, after a couple of not so good marriages, so yeah, I try to find that balance with them too, because it is heavy. Like you said, it is very, very heavy. So you have to find that happy balance. But well, I really appreciate you talking to me, and I'm actually gonna, if you're okay with it, I'm gonna put the link to the book. Which link would you prefer? Amazon?
You could do. Why don't you do, if you can, do two? Do the one from my publisher,
Okay,
and then maybe bookshop.org,
bookshop.
um,
Okay,
or Amazon. I mean, I work for Amazon, so
okay, all right. I'll just
um,
publish.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah, perfect. And I'll put the link to your book, so that people can find it. And do you have any more readings coming up? I thought I saw you post one.
I don't have anything currently in the works. I did just do a
Oh, you
wonderful
just
reading in Baltimore earlier in January, which was great, and I'll hopefully have a recording of that to share at some point soon. But no current readings lined up, but
okay.
glad to do some. Maybe I'll be able to get up to your neck of the woods and do something.
That would be great. You and Ashley should do a reading together.
Yeah, I would love that.
That would be
I really
awesome.
would love that.
That would be awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. I really appreciate it. And like I said, thanks for your grace with me having to cancel a couple times in this whole mess this morning. So it was great talking to you.
You
So,
too.
and enjoy your night out tonight.
I
So,
shall.
all right. Well, thank you. I will let you get on with the rest of your day. So,
Okay,
all
sounds great.
right.
Thanks a bunch. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.